This video is going to cover the topic of multiplying mixed numbers. Be sure the date and topic are at the top of your page. And the essential question is, how do we multiply mixed numbers? We've already talked about how to multiply fractions. So for example, we can multiply 2/3 times 1/2 by multiplying our numerators and our denominators to get our solution, right? So 1 times 2 is 2, and then we could do 3 times 2 is 6, right? And that's how we would multiply our fractions. Of course, we would then simplify our answer. So how can we use that to help us multiply mixed numbers? How, for example, could we figure out what 1/3 of 2.5 would be? And before we answer that, I just want to mention that when we've been multiplying by fractions, right, and this is true of mixed numbers as well, our answer we get, the product we get, will be smaller than what we started with, right? If we want 1/3 of 2.5 pizzas, we're going to get less than 2.5, right? The answer will be smaller than our original value. And that can feel weird when we're used to multiplying, making things grow or get larger. So just keep that in mind as we work with our fractions. So as I like to do, I'm going to start off with a model. So we're starting with 2.5 of something. So I have 2 whole sections that I'm going to shade in. And then I want half of this other one. So I'm just going to draw a dotted line down the middle. And this is going to represent my 2.5, right? A mixed number means we have some wholes and then a part of another. So 2 wholes and then a half. But in my situation, I only want 1/3 of this whole thing. So I'm going to go ahead and cut each of these into thirds, right? 1/3 here, 1/3 here, and so on. I'm going to do the same thing horizontally in all of my pieces. And I'm going to shade in this 1/3 on all of my sections here. Right, that's the part that if I were actually cutting something up, that's the part that I would take, 1/3 of my 2.5. Which means I want this section here, and this smaller section here. So if I want to count up how much I'm using as my solution, it's a little sneaky right now because these sizes are not all the same, and we want them to be the same. So to do that, I'm going to do a simple cut. I'm going to cut this down the middle, just like I did on my far right box. Right? And now I can say, oh, this piece here is worth 1 out of 6. This is 1/6, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces that are each 1/6 of a whole. So my answer is 5/6. When I did 1/3 of 2.5, the answer is 5/6. Which again is smaller than what I started with, but that makes sense, right? I'm only taking 1/3 of this whole thing. So I'm gonna end up with 5 pieces, and they all represent 1/6 of a whole. But that's kind of a lot, right? This is a lot to do, and I don't really anticipate drawing this out every time. So I think it'd be reasonable for us to come up with an algorithm for this. The algorithm for multiplying mixed numbers is actually very much similar to the algorithm we've used just for multiplying fractions, with one extra step. And that extra step comes at the beginning. Any mixed numbers that we have, we actually want to convert them first into improper fractions. We want to get rid of that mixed part altogether. Once we have that, we'll have 2 numerators that we can just multiply like we've done before. So step 2 is just to multiply the numerators. And you might be able to guess step 3, which would of course be to multiply the denominators like we've done before. And that leaves us with our final step, which is, as always, simplify the fraction if it can be simplified, if needed. Let's look back at that example we did at the beginning with the model, right? So I have 1/3 of 2.5. 1/3 is fine, right? That's already as a fraction, but I need to convert 2.5 into an improper fraction. So that means I'm going to say, well, 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. This is the fraction 5 over 2. And so then I would just rewrite this as 1/3 times 5 over 2. And from there, I just do what I've done before. I'm going to do 1 times 5 is 5. And I'll do 3 times 2 is 6. So my fraction, just like before, was 5/6. This one doesn't happen to need any simplification, so it's done as is. All right, let's take a look at this one. So we have 1/4 of 1 5/8. So I'm first going to check. The first one's a fraction, so that one's fine. But this one I need to change into an improper fraction. So I'm going to go ahead and do 8 times 1 is 8 plus 5. And that's 13. I'm just thinking where to write that. So I'm going to do 13, and I keep my denominator of 8. So I'm going to rewrite this as 1/4 times 13/8. And from there, I'm just going to use my algorithm. 1 times 13 is 13, and 4 times 8, my denominators, would be 32. And a quick look at that, I can't simplify that at all. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it as is. The answer would be 13/32. This one is slightly different, right? I still have a fraction, but now I have a whole number. So I'm actually just going to keep this as 3/4. And the nice thing about this whole number is I can really quickly turn it into an improper fraction by putting it over the value of 1. 16 is the same as 16 over 1. And then I can just go ahead and multiply my numerator and multiply by denominator. But you might be noticing that this one can be simplified. And so this would end up being the same as 12 over 1, or a final answer of just 12. So if I have 3/4 of 16 cookies, I'd eat 12 cookies. As usual, I like to kind of point out common errors. So I just want to take a moment to show you a common error that I see. I sometimes see students doing it this way where they say, oh, 2 times 2 equals 4. And then they say, 1/3 times 1/2 equals 1/6. And I just want to point out that this does not work, right? That is not how we multiply. We always have to change things into our improper fractions. And I always sort of make the analogy and point out that we would never do this, right? We would never say 2 times 3 is 6, and 1 times 2 is 2. So 21 times 32 is 62. We know that's ridiculous, right? We know that does not work. So that would be kind of like doing this common error, right? Don't ever do this, so don't ever do that, okay? And it's inevitable that one of us will do that from time to time, right? But just kind of keep that in mind so we can try to avoid that as best we can. All right, which leaves us with your turn. So go ahead and try to find 4/9 of 1 3/4. Follow the steps as best you can and see if you can simplify at the end. And of course, we'll talk about this whole process a bit more together in class. And remember, the essential question of this video was, how do we multiply mixed numbers?